Great. I can see everybody filing in. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm just going to have a quick attempt to rename myself before I introduce myself properly, but having a bit of an issue with doing that, so just bear with me 1 second. It's not updating on the graphic on my screen, so I just have to apologize. My name is not Andrew Laird. My name is Yannick Mitchell. I'm a consultant at Mutual Ventures, and since February this year, I've been working closely with the Wolverhampton DFJ area and leading on the learning program, which is part of the Trailblazers program, and of which this webinar is a part. I'm really pleased to welcome you all to what is the second of our webinars that we are running as part of the Department for Education's DFJ Trailblazers Reducing Time to Family Court pilot program. So for those joining from outside of the program, I know there's a few signups from outside of the program, which is really brilliant. The sort of ambition and the aim of the program is working with 5 designated family judge areas, 3 of which I'm joined on screen by and represented on this webinar, to pilot solutions that will tackle the drivers of delay across the family justice system and subsequently improving outcomes for children. So you can find out more about the program by going to our webpage, which is mutualventures.co.uk/trailblazers. You'll also find several blog posts that we've written covering some big topics in family justice. There's also several webinars that we've recorded about a year ago as part of a previous iteration of the courts program. So you can find lots of resources on our website. But in terms of this webinar, we are focused on the development of regional workforce development plans that will support DFJ areas to upskill staff, to increase confidence in workforces that are doing court work, and ultimately to improve timeliness for those who are going through the care proceedings process. And I'm really pleased to welcome our 3 panelists. So I'll just turn to them now to ask them to introduce themselves, their roles and the areas that they are representing. So Beth, I'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Beth Lucas. I'm the Practice Development Lead for the Trailblazer in the Wolverhampton DFJ area.
Thank you, Beth. Luke.
Hi, I'm Luke Froman. I'm the Trailblazer Project Lead working with Essex, Suffolk, Southend and Thurrock.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. And finally, Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny Blake. I'm a strategic social worker working for the Trailblazer Project in the Guildford DFJ area.
Great. Well, thanks to the 3 of you all for joining. Before we get started with our topic and get stuck in, just to cover a few housekeeping points, I'd really like to invite you to use the Q&A function within the webinar to submit any questions that you have throughout this. We will try to get through questions as they come in, and where we're not able to do because of time, we will do our best to follow up with you outside of this webinar. A recording of this session is going to be available on our website, so hopefully you all find it really interesting and really useful, really insightful, and you want to circulate it with colleagues. You can go to our website and share the link from there. So that's kind of all the admin-y parts. So I will kick us off with the first question. So I've kind of mentioned briefly in my introduction that sort of ultimate ambition of this program is about reducing delays and improving timeliness in the DFJ areas. So before we kickstart into kind of a bit more detail about the sort of training plans that you're all in the process of developing, it would be great just to get a brief summary from each of you as to what the main causes of delay in your regions are. So I will kick off, and I'll start with Luke, if that's okay.
That's fine. So I think it's a complicated question. I think there's lots of variables in terms of across the region, different stakeholders, policies and processes, etc. And there's a lot of different perspectives. on where those main drivers of delay come from. I think one of the themes that we're working with is around training for social workers in the context of a workforce where there's turnover of staff, where there might be newly qualified social workers, or there might be social workers with minimal court experience. One of the issues that we're addressing is around data and inconsistency in data that's currently provided by local authorities or Cafcass or the court system. So the aim is to have a consistent set of data that helps us to understand where those drivers of delay come from, but also how those drivers change over time, because what we see is changes in types of cases, policies, procedure, practice guidance can introduce different variables and might improve some areas, but also might introduce different types of delay. So the idea of having a well-informed region who can kind of track those issues as they change and respond to them as they change is one of the key themes for us, really. One theme that we see is a kind of joint theme around social workers' confidence in the court arena, also trust in the social worker from other parties in court and other stakeholders. It might be that a guardian is not confident in a social worker's assessment, but it might also be that a social worker feels like their assessment isn't going to be valued in that process. So there's a dual approach there around training for the social worker and making sure the quality of that work, that assessment, that analysis is there, but also kind of building relationships with other stakeholders, working closely with guardians, etc., to kind of come at that issue from both sides. We're also doing some work around kind of shared principles for all stakeholders across the process. So what are the things that local authorities really prize and value and are focusing on in order to deal with drivers of delay? And also what are the similar questions for Cafcass, for the courts, for solicitors who are representing parents, etc. So that we can all kind of understand each other and ourselves a bit better, and we can kind of commit to the things that we think are going to take responsibility for our part in that systemic process and those bits that we think we can do differently to address those drivers of delay. We're also working around the regional communication structure so that we have good communication across the local authorities in the region. We mitigate kind of silo working. We have good communication between Cafcass and the local authorities, and all of that information feeds into the local Family Justice Board to make it a well-informed forum where we can kind of get together, understand what's going on in the region and make coherent plans. Some of the work we've been doing is around kind of deep dive conversations with managers and professionals who are involved in the court process on a day-to-day basis. And there's a number of themes that kind of come out of those discussions quite consistently, some around timetabling and how cases are timetabled in court, how we might kind of do that to prevent drift and delay, but also how we might acknowledge the time that it takes a local authority to pull together analysis, final evidence, etc., to allow time for that to be a good quality piece of work, which might prevent repetition later on within the proceedings. The role of the guardian, and particularly the close joint working between the local authority and Cafcass, is a theme that's kind of come up quite consistently, with the obvious kind of outcome being the closer we can work together throughout the life of proceedings, the more we're likely to be on the same page and the more we're likely to be able to address issues before they develop into points of delay within proceedings. So yeah, I think there's probably a number of other things, but I'll leave some space for my colleagues to come in and talk about their experience.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. And you touched on throughout that something I probably should have mentioned in my introduction, that obviously we're working with local authorities, and local authorities have bid to kind of of this program. We recognise that this is not a local authority only issue, and it's not local authorities with all the answers, and there's a real emphasis throughout on working with partners across the family justice system. So thanks for kind of highlighting that and touching on that. Beth, I will come to you on sort of main causes of delays in your area, the Wolverhampton area.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of similarities with what Luke's just said, particularly when we're thinking about the level of experience of our staff, the level of confidence that our staff have. we do have a relatively inexperienced workforce, and there's been quite high levels of staff turnover. And within that as well, there's also been a real challenge of those who are more experienced not really having the capacity to share their knowledge with less experienced staff. So that's a real challenge that I'm wanting to address throughout the Trailblazer. Other areas for us is that there's been this increase in the use of expert assessments, but we don't really have the experts available to complete them. And there's this perception from social workers that because there's a lack of trust in their assessments from other parts of the system, that they believe that's kind of leading to more independent social work assessments being requested from their perception unnecessarily. Another area of delay for us is that family members and connected carers are often presenting quite late on in proceedings. So when that happens, the 26-week target becomes impossible for us to achieve because we need to do a thorough assessment of those family members. So that means that we need to be looking at not just what we're doing in care proceedings, but what we're doing before we get to care proceedings as well to try and mitigate that. Another challenge we've kind of found is that there's some pockets of really good practice across the area, but to date, there's not been any kind of any way of sharing that best practice across the region. So that's something we're wanting to address as well and make sure that we're pulling on areas of expertise that already exist.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Beth. Thank you for that. And finally, Jenny, I'll come to you. Thanks.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of what Luke and Beth have already spoken about is really relevant in the Guildford area as well. I mean, I'll say something that's different for my role than Beth and Luke is the fact that I only work with one local authority, Surrey, which I think does play a really, well, it makes a really big difference in trying to understand what the main causes of delay are, because it's only that one local authority that I have to review. The main reasons that we have delays in Surrey for court proceedings are, like Beth just said, the delays to assessments of wider family members. And this is the late presentation that Beth spoke about, but also significant delays with the checks and the medicals and the DBSs. So like Beth spoke about, it's about working with our social workers much earlier, so before court, with the identification of those wider family members. And that's impacted by like the high turnover and the inexperience of staff as well that Luke and Beth have spoken about. Something that Luke and Beth haven't spoken about so much is the quality of our pre-proceedings work and how important that is in achieving the 26-week target. So that's where, from my reviewing kind of at the start of the project, there was real inconsistency in our use of the pre-proceedings process in ensuring it was kind of consistent, well planned. We were doing all the assessments that we needed to do. So that's something that's been identified as an area where we could make like big improvements that should really impact. So a lot of the training has been focusing on improving that pre-proceedings process.
Yeah, that's really useful to hear. Thank you, Jenny. So I've kind of asked you to all summarize the areas of delays. You've talked about some of the similarities. You know, there are some similarities. We know that it's not all unique in each area, that there are some common challenges throughout the three areas that you're representing, and I'm sure across the country as well, there are some similarities. So I suppose the first question then really is why a training plan, a regional training plan, will help to solve some of those delays. I know that's quite a broad question, but what is it, you know, that you hope to achieve kind of through your training plans, how that will actually lead to the reduction in delay? For ease, Jenny, I'll come to you first this time. That's okay.
Thanks, Yannick. So yeah, as we've all spoken about, there is also inexperience in social workers in Surrey. So we've got lots of newly qualified social workers who don't have the experience in court. And like Beth spoke about, our experienced social workers have high caseloads, so often the sharing of their knowledge isn't happening. So we identified that actually there was just some lack of knowledge in terms of like the key timescales for pre-proceedings. But that lack of knowledge, but also the lack of confidence in their like how to write a good assessment, like knowing if they've actually done a good piece of work really wasn't there. Because sometimes an inexperienced social worker can actually be, you know, a really good social worker, you know, who writes really good quality assessments, but they don't necessarily know what good looks like and if they're achieving that. So that was why it was really key to ensure that everybody had that shared understanding of what good is, what the timescales are, and to kind of build their confidence. You know, we are the applicant, the local authority. We know these children, these family best, and we're confident in our assessment and our recommendations. And I think it's that confidence once we get into court that is so important in maintaining like that social work grip on the court proceedings process. I think it's when you lose that grip that it can kind of take on a life of its own, with kind of the court and the other parties almost kind of taking over and having their maybe a different agenda. So that's why we thought the training package is so important in helping to reduce the delay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jenny. Thank you for that. Beth, I'll come to you. I suspect there might be some similarities there as well.
Yeah, definitely some similarities with Jenny. So one of the things that we really want to focus on is building that confidence that social workers have. I think that where people feel underskilled or they lack confidence, they're also less likely to remain in their job roles. And we know that turnover in social work is a huge issue. People aren't remaining in the profession for as long as we need them to. And I do think that by providing the training and the resources that people need to do their jobs, they'll feel more confident and hopefully remain in social work for a much longer time. So I am hopeful that by addressing the issues around confidence and helping social workers to feel able to tackle pre-proceedings work and care proceedings work, that we'll see kind of an improvement. Other areas though, so we'd identified obviously independent social work assessments or expert assessments as a driver of delay. And really there's quite a simple fix to that. If we can train our social workers in doing the expert assessments that are being requested in court, then we don't need to create delay by relying on external people. So one of the things we focused on is providing parent assess training across the region. And we've had a huge parent assess training package that we've rolled out. And hopefully that will reduce the delay when those assessments are needed. Also, going back to what Jenny said in the previous question about pre-proceedings, we're going to be focusing a lot of our training in this area because we know that there's a lot of work that we can do prior to initiating care proceedings that can then reduce the delay once we're there, particularly in relation to assessing other family members. But there's also a lot of assessment we can do with the family themselves. We can get ahead of things like cognitive and capacity assessments where they're needed, so that that's not then taking time out of care proceedings. So we're going to have a real training focus on pre-proceedings. So we want social workers to feel confident in making pre-proceedings meaningful and not just a step to care proceedings, and really making the most of that time. And again, within that, making sure they feel confident to really explore family networks at a much earlier date, so that those assessments can be started and completed. And that's not just helpful in reducing delay, but it also means that if there are suitable family members and we do need to initiate care proceedings, we can hopefully place children with those family members at the start of care proceedings and not at some point during, which is better for them. It's going to reduce the impact on them. But also, in addition to that, if we're getting a better understanding of those family networks, we might actually be able to avoid care proceedings entirely, because we can build on that family support. And again, about making pre-proceedings more meaningful and useful, and using it as a way to divert away from care proceedings where possible.
Great, thanks, Beth. Luke, do you have anything that you wanted to add on that question?
I mean, I think most of the things I wanted to cover have already been covered, but there are a couple of points really. A lot of what's already been said is kind of talked about training for social workers. Some of the aspects that we're focusing on is training for managers and more senior managers to kind of take on that QA role within proceedings, to really kind of scrutinise the work of a social worker in PLO or at the point of issuing to kind of say, actually, do we have all of the evidence required here? Or if not, do we understand where the gaps are and why we have gaps? And, you know, is this the right time to go into court? Is it safe and appropriate for us to take a bit more time and kind of cover those gaps? Or do we need to kind of make a decision to say we are going into court at this stage because that's what's right for this child? Actually, we recognise and identify that there are gaps here that might require further assessment within proceedings. So to be able to kind of have some consistency around how team managers, service managers think about those issues is something that we feel will be really, really helpful in terms of reducing elements of delay, including children who can stay within their family safely, not going to court in the first place, which obviously is the best outcome for the family and is a massive kind of reduction in terms of the pressure on the whole of the system, but also making sure that if we do decide that actually proceedings is the right thing, that we're as prepared and as we possibly can be to kind of go down that road. The other thing that I would highlight is some of the thinking from within our project is around kind of the multi-agency element of training. So not just for local authority social workers, but where can we find training that's relevant to social workers, to solicitors, to guardians, where we can kind of create a space where everybody comes together to think about those issues and understand the different perspectives that are involved, understand what's important to other stakeholders in the process, and really learn a bit about ourselves and each other to really kind of focus on those additional elements, because training in isolation, you know, won't have the impact that we want it to have. And the training offer and thoughts about training need to be seen alongside other elements: strong commitment to positive relationships across the system, clarity around multi-agency expectations, respect for the resources that are required to do a good job. A service manager can have all the training around what a good assessment looks like, but actually within the process, do they have enough time to kind of put that into action, and do we respect that? A culture of kind of respectful and constructive challenge is really important to kind of reflect on our own practice as we move along through the process, and help each other reflect on elements of that as well. And commitment from all of the stakeholders to take their own kind of systemic responsibility. What is my responsibility within the whole of this system at this time? And am I doing what I can do to kind of make sure that I'm not a cause of drivers of delay, or I'm helping and supporting to mitigate that?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. I think that's a really important point, because we, you know, talked about kind of the wider family justice system involvement at the start, but systems are only systems if they're sort of pulling in the same direction and sort of sharing purpose and principles in the way that you've talked about previously. Otherwise, they're just a group of sort of separate organizations. So that's a really important consideration, I think. Great, thank you all. So we've gotten to a point now where we've kind of identified the delays in your region. You've thought about kind of how training can support them. So I suppose what would be interesting now will be kind of, I suppose, some sort of practical things that you've done, and really about how you've identified the need, you know, the sort of knowledge gaps in your workforces and prioritized training needs. Because, I mean, one thing that I should have mentioned up top is that this program lasts until March 2025. So, you know, there's not kind of a 24-month training plan for the kind of next couple of years or whatever, but we've got until kind of March 2025. So how have you gone about sort of determining the knowledge gaps in your workforce and prioritizing those training needs accordingly? So Beth, I will come to you first on that one.
Thank you. So the information from Mutual Ventures was actually a really good starting point for us. It helped us to recognise the lack of confidence in local authority assessments, the reliance on expert assessments, you know, those things that were contributing to delay, which meant that we could put in plans around that very, very quickly, so we could get the parent assess up and running almost straight away. Since I've come into post, I've been trying to get feedback from social workers across all 6 local authorities on where they feel their training needs lie and where they lack confidence. And that's been really interesting, actually, going through that data, because we can see that some of the local authorities have social workers who are much more confident than others, and I think that tends to be where there's dedicated court teams. But some of the themes that have come up from that are around a lack of confidence in writing statements, having effective pre-proceedings plans, and unsurprisingly, giving evidence as well is a source of anxiety for most social workers who are involved in care proceedings in one way or another. So doing that has been really helpful, because now we can actually tailor the training that we are offering to make sure that it addresses what social workers feel that they need from training. We want it to be purposeful and meaningful. We also have the workforce development work stream that we're picking back up, and that's going to be helpful in gaining insight from senior managers from across those local authorities as well. So what are they seeing in the practice that could be contributing to delay, and how can we work together to address that through a practice development plan? We also are trying to get feedback from other partners, so feedback from CAFCASS and the judiciary on where they think we have knowledge gaps. We know that there's issues around their lack of confidence in the local authorities. So what do they need from us so that they can trust in the work that we're doing? And as much as possible, we're trying to use existing forums for that, because we know that everyone's really busy. So we recently had an LFJB development day. So we utilised that to kind of network with other partners and try and get some feedback there as well, which was helpful. In terms of priorities, for me, a big priority is about making sure whatever we're doing is sustainable. As you said, the Trailblazer itself will only last until March 2025. And we need, for whatever plans we put in place, to be effective long beyond that. So whilst I'm in post, I can do a lot in terms of training and rolling out resources, rolling out information across the local authorities. But I really want to invest in making sure that the local authorities can then pick that up themselves. So working alongside them to come up with sustainable training plans for their own workforces.
Great, thanks, Beth. Just to provide a kind of a bit of additional context, you mentioned at the start the sort of information that you had from Mutual Ventures. So for those not on the programme, so the Trailblazers sort of started their implementation of their solutions in April, and we sort of had begun work in February sometime to sort of engage social workers, guardians, as many people as we could across the system, and did some sort of identifying some of the areas of delay, talking to social workers about their experiences of working in court. So we produced a report off the back of that, which produced some insights as to what staff in the area were saying. So that's some of the context there. And I will pass over to Luke.
Thanks, Yannick. So a lot of similar things in terms of what Beth has already talked about. Some of the areas that we were working on are those really kind of established themes around quality of assessment, repeat assessment, etc. One of the things we're really focused on is kind of looking at the data and understanding what the data is telling us in order to kind of look at where the gaps might be and kind of direct us in terms of training offers. The deep dive conversations that we've had with managers and other stakeholders have been really interesting, and there's a few themes that have kind of come out quite consistently around that, and some quite unexpected in terms of maybe not unexpected, but where we don't have a kind of existing training offer often across the LA. So one of those issues was around kind of the conversations that happen outside of court when social workers are kind of attending court. So a lot of what we see in terms of court training is around how to write a statement, how to give good verbal evidence. But what our social workers are saying is actually it's the conversations that happen outside where the kind of horse trading element is there, and really kind of helping social workers to have confidence to understand that they are instructing their barrister who's represented them in that space, and if the barrister kind of isn't hearing them, how do you go about kind of challenging that and making sure that your view and your instructions as a social worker kind of gets through, or making sure that that piece of evidence that's in your statement that isn't being picked up, that's a really good indication of the risk that's going on in this family, comes to the fore in those conversations. So yeah, there are elements like that where we're kind of looking at and thinking, actually, our local authorities aren't talking about that in their court focused training, and that's a real gap for social workers consistently across the piece, which is really helpful to kind of have an opportunity to kind of understand that and think about what we can do about that moving forward. We're kind of at the stage where we're kind of going through what is the offer from each local authority, what is each local authority able to provide in terms of training for social workers in this region, and kind of identifying gaps there, or looking at what our authorities doing really well in terms of training that could be kind of translate and shared more widely across the region, etc. So I think they're the things that I would add in relation to that question.
Great, thank you, Luke. And finally, Jenny, if you have anything to kind of share about how you've determined the knowledge gaps in your workforce and how you're prioritising training needs in Surrey.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I said, I've got the advantage of only working with one local authority, which did make it, I think, a lot easier to kind of identify where the knowledge gaps are. So I started with like the overview that Mutual Ventures gave that Beth spoke about. But from then, I was kind of easily able to access data. So I reviewed like our families in pre-proceedings, kind of quantitatively, looking at kind of what the data is showing us, what are the delays, and then spoke with team managers to hear from them, like context behind it and what's really going on. I then did some dip sampling of our families in care proceedings. So I picked like some random weeks. So those between 30 and 40 weeks, what were the drivers of delay with those families? And from that, it did pull out the key themes, which, you know, there was obvious overlap with the themes that have been identified by Mutual Ventures, but it just really helped to kind of bring the context and see how much like this is a repeating issue and how much weight to put on each area. And from that, we could kind of use the key themes as like a thread running through a lot of our training, because so many of the key areas of delay, it doesn't happen in isolation at one point. It's like the child's journey. It needs, like, for example, identifying the wider network and unlocking that needs to start right from the off and carry through the whole way through our journey with a child. So thinking about how that key message can spread through. I also could work with colleagues in the local authority. So working with the FGC team, our family group conference team, looking at, say, the number of FGCs that they were holding. You know, I could easily review that data. The same with our family and friends team, and look at where they had any kind of areas of delay and sticking points. So yeah, actually getting to that point, I think, was probably a lot easier for me than Luke and Beth, just because of the much smaller area that I'm working within.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Jenny. So we're going to 11. So we've got about just under half an hour left. So just a prompt to those who have joined us in the webinar, please do use the Q&A function to ask questions of our excellent panelists about kind of the training plans that they're developing. Yeah, please make use of that if you'd like to. So the next question is something that kind of you've all, I think, probably referred to or mentioned, is that, you know, you've talked about staff turnover and staff capacity. So in many ways, it's quite difficult to develop a training plan, you know, and sort of implement a training plan amongst a workforce, which is, as you say, you know, at capacity, with this high turnover. And as a result, I guess for some of your staff in your areas, it's quite difficult to attend day-long trainings. Some trainings can be one day this month and another day the next month, and that's quite a time commitment. So it would be interesting to know how you've thought about kind of the accessibility of your training plans, making sure staff feel able to actually attend and get the most out of them. So I'm trying to just rotate kind of who gets to go first. I will come to Jenny. I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah. So all of the trainings that we developed are bite-size, and they are all less than an hour in length. They are all online, and they are also being separately recorded as webinars. So they work as standalone trainings, but also you can watch all of them, because we were thinking about how frustrating it is as social workers when you attend these long training sessions, and only a small part of it is actually applicable to you and the role you do. So some of the sessions might be more appropriate for like a social worker in assessment, for example, but maybe they don't want to hear the one on like how to have an effective IRH, for example. So really thinking about targeting the right social workers for the right training. We also thought about reducing barriers to getting social workers to the training. And one of the barriers in Surrey is the portal that we use to book on the training, which is cumbersome and timely, and social workers get frustrated. So actually, we're just running it as a Teams event and just invited people via Teams. And yeah, our trainings have started, and we've had like about 150 social workers at our training sessions. So really good turnout, because our intention was, our main goal was to reach the maximum number of social workers that we could, as opposed to kind of a more intensive interactive training. You know, it's about sharing knowledge. So that's been really important. Also kind of making use of what's already in place. So where we've got like team away days or service meetings, you know, coming to them. So we're not expecting social workers to have additional tasks that they have to do. So kind of like Beth was saying, using systems that are already in place to share the knowledge. So yeah, I will leave it there. Thank you, Yannick.
Thanks, Jenny. And I've also really enjoyed the sort of kind of the 1 minute kind of training guides that you've produced as well, sort of written pieces that you can kind of refer back to, and I think they're really helpful. And I was on a training course yesterday, and I think they showed us a graph of the kind of how much you retain and at what point your retention starts to dip in a training session. And it's probably quite telling that I actually can't remember what that actual time frame was, but it was surprisingly short. So that makes a lot of sense, kind of your approach to that. Thanks. Beth, I'll come to you next to kind of about accessibility, the way you're thinking about accessibility for your trainings.
Yeah, of course. I think it's a real challenge. There's a lot we want to achieve over a very short space of time. But we also want to minimise the impact on service delivery. And we know that people get fatigued by attending too much training. And as you said, they're just not going to retain it. For me, it also ties into how we make the what we're doing here in the Trailblazer more sustainable moving forward as well. So one of the things that I'm looking at alongside traditional training is developing a practice handbook. And also brief guides, very similar to what Jenny has done. I won't pretend that I came up with that idea. I did take it from Jenny, because what she's done is fantastic, that people can keep referring back to. And any training we offer will have resources that go alongside it. Because I think one of the things with training is, if it's not the exact training you need at that moment, you tend to forget a lot of it. So what I want is for people to be able to have that stuff to refer back to go, right, okay, I know I went on training, can't remember any of it, but all the materials are here that I can use. We've also been developing a podcast. So we've done one episode of that podcast so far, where we're having guest speakers from across the system to share information. And that's really interesting, because people can then access that whenever and wherever they want to. It's also short in comparison to normal training, and providing information in quite a digestible and informal way, so people can kind of pick up on bits and pieces that are relevant to them. But also I'm thinking along the same lines of as Jenny, about making training bite-sized. So I'm thinking a lot about how best to deliver that. And some of that means that it will be virtual, particularly doing it across local authorities, which will make it more accessible, shorter times. But then also for people who do feel that they need that in-person, more intensive training, maybe those who are less experienced, offering some face-to-face events as well, where there can be more interactive and more practice-based elements to it. So in terms of accessibility, trying to have a range of things on offer, because people learn very differently. Some people don't really learn through training, they do learn through doing their own reading. So that combination of training in different formats and also having resources available to people for when they need them.
Yeah, I think that's really crucial. I mean, particularly because, I mean, I often thought when I've been on training and we've got somebody who joins the organization like a week later, that, you know, they would have really benefited from that training too. Unfortunately, because they joined a week too late, they, you know, they haven't been able to benefit from that same offer that the rest of the team has. So having those sort of materials that sit alongside it are really important, I think. Thanks, Beth. Luke, I'll come to you finally. Don't worry, you're first up on the next question. So if you've not got loads to add on that, just let me know. But yeah, come to you now.
Thanks, Hanneke. I mean, I think, you know, the things that we're thinking about are the same things that that Beth and Jenny have already kind of mentioned, really, in terms of the format we're providing training in, looking at kind of resource packs, short guides, recorded training sessions, virtual training sessions, to make them as accessible as possible. The other thing we're thinking about is to have the ability for a social worker starting in one local authority in the region, if a particular training isn't for another 6 months in their local authority, is there a training sooner in another local authority, and can we kind of share that resource, and would it be and kind of invite social workers along to trainings that are going on in the various local authorities. The other thing that I would add is, as part of the project, we're developing some tools around kind of supporting consistency of thinking around what does QA of an assessment look like, or how can we demonstrate that the decisions we make are fair and proportional, and things like that. So where we are developing a new tool to kind of assist with that, those kind of areas of practice where we're thinking about what is the training that kind of sits alongside that tool, that kind of really pulls out the underlying principles of how those tools are being developed, and helps people understand how to use those tools, when to apply them, etc.
That's it. Thanks, Luke. Great, thank you, everybody. So next question, which is again something we've kind of talked about. I think, Luke, you've kind of mentioned this as well previously, but we, you know, certainly when we started out, part of the focus was really on developing multi-agency plans, with kind of a recognition that the solutions don't all sit with local authorities, the issues don't all sit with local authorities, and it's a cross-system challenge in terms of court delay. So it'd be interesting to know what kind of considerations you've made to ensure that your training plans do consider other agencies and are multi-agency training plans. So you know, ways you might have developed with CAFCASS, with judiciary, you know, colleagues across the system. So interested to hear how you've considered the multi-agency challenge. Luke, come to you first on that one.
So I think within our region, there's a whole piece of work, as I mentioned earlier, around kind of strengthening the regional communication and pulling together a structure of communication that feeds into the local family justice board, and part of that, particularly in relation to training and development, is around a learning and development subgroup of the local family justice board. So we've been working with the chair of the LFJB to kind of put that in place and make sure that the subgroup is kind of clear in terms of purpose and engagement, etc. So that obviously is a really good forum for multi-agency stakeholders to attend, and to think collectively about where are the gaps in training, what training needs to be offered, how can we do that in a multi-agency way. So one of the first things that's going to come out of that group is a virtual, or a set of virtual trainings that are open to local authority social workers, to solicitors, to CAFCASS guardians, drawing out the principles around the PLO relaunch, and just kind of offering an opportunity to share some of the resource from that, to kind of set up breakout conversations, which include a social worker, a solicitor, a guardian, to really kind of bring together people from different parts of the system to really think about what are those principles and what do they mean for me in my particular role, and what is it helpful for others to know, and then to offer an opportunity for people to kind of make a commitment to kind of say, given I've now had the opportunity to think about those issues and look at it from different perspectives, this is one of the things I might do differently moving forward to kind of contribute positively to what goes on systemically. So yeah, I think the idea from our point of view is for thinking about sustainability is for all of those conversations to feed through that communication structure into that learning and development subgroup, so that even if there's training that's not necessarily focused on that multi-agency kind of piece of work, other parts of the system are aware of what's going on and are aware of what the local authorities are doing, for example, to support their social workers, or what CAFCASS is doing, for example, to support guardians.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Luke. I will come to Jenny next on that one, on multi-agency training plans.
Thank you, Yannick. So firstly, with the training that was going to be delivered to the local authority, we wanted to make sure that both CAFCASS and the judiciary were kind of happy with that content, because what we didn't want to do was to train lots of social workers and then find that they thought they were gaps. So ensuring that the training plans went via them early on was a key part. In terms of involving them more in like a cross-system commitment, we've been working with CAFCASS closely, because that relationship is really key in tackling delays. So we've been working with like the service manager from CAFCASS to have a set kind of agreed commitment on communication that guardians and social workers are going to sign up to. We've also been looking at different, more creative ways of kind of utilising the judiciary, because it's one of the challenges has been time for everybody, and kind of getting them. They've all been actually really committed to the project, but it's about the time for it. So one of our judges has agreed to film some short videos looking like a video for social workers about what they think is really important, and also a video for families to try and demystify the process for them. We are going to the LFJB training day, kind of similar to what Luke's spoken about, and that will be to really share key messages about the the relaunch of PLO, and thinking about tackling those drivers of delay and what they can be doing differently. So yeah, those are the key things that we're doing in summary.
Yeah, great. Another example of using those sorts of existing forums. I know we had the LFJB Development Day recently in Wolverhampton, and it is the only opportunity you'll have in that year where all of those people are going to be in the same room. So it's really valuable where you can make the most of those, I think. Beth, come to you next.
Yeah, so similar to Luke and Jenny, we're trying to ensure buy-in from the other agencies like CAFCASS and the judiciary, asking them to be part of what we're delivering. One of the things that we had arranged was with the previous DFJ to deliver a training session for less experienced social workers. So that was going to be delivered in the court itself. They'd have an hour with her where she could kind of share her expectations of social workers. They could kind of see around the court, demystify all of those processes a little bit for them. Unfortunately, that did have to be cancelled, but we are going to be picking that back up with the new DFJ. And we're going to be thinking about how we can roll that out wider as well, kind of linking back to those time pressures, whether we can create a video that people can watch in their own time, so that it's not just kind of trapped in this trailblazer period. We've been thinking about how we can link in with CAFCASS more as well, so we can work better together in care proceedings, and how we can tie that into the workforce development plans. And one of the things we have coming up next month is an interface with CAFCASS, which I think will be really helpful. But we're keen to draw on the expertise of the people around us. So, I think some of the best people sometimes to talk to us about what we're doing well or not doing well in court are the solicitors that represent us. They can be quite open and honest with areas where we're struggling. So we've actually got some of our local authority solicitors on board to develop and deliver some training in the new year, which will be around attending court, writing statements and giving evidence. And that's going to be a really interactive training session where people can actually have a practice at things like giving evidence, which I think will reduce anxiety quite a lot. So we're then going to look at how that can be rolled out across the other local authorities in the future by getting solicitors from other local authorities involved in developing and delivering that as well.
Excellent, great. Thanks, Beth. So moving on to kind of our last kind of couple of questions is really thinking about impact, measuring impact, and kind of finishing with kind of sort of next steps, really. So I suppose the question is really about how we will know, and this is really, I guess, a question for our evaluation partner as well, but how we'll be able to sort of measure the impact of the sort of regional workforce plans that you are implementing. So how, what impact they have on efficiency, effectiveness, the impact they have on family court proceedings. So what success will actually look like? What indicators might you be monitoring? So I'll come back to you, Beth, on that one, if you don't mind kicking us off with that.
Yeah, of course. So I think success isn't something that's going to come overnight with this. I think a lot of the things that we're putting in place will have a gradual kind of cumulative impact. But I think if we get it right now, we'll gradually see improvements over a longer period of time. But things that I'd be hoping that we'd see, and we'll kind of see this through the data that's collected, are a reduction of families entering into care proceedings. And when we do enter into care proceedings, there's less delay, there's more work that's been done ahead of time. We'll see effective pre-proceedings, people using that in a better way. Hopefully we'll see a reduction in the number of independent social work assessments being completed, and I will be kind of reevaluating the workforce, sending out another questionnaire to try and assess people's level of confidence. And I would hope to see some improvement in that by the end of the Trailblazer as well. I think in an ideal world also, I'd like to see a reduction in staff turnover, but again, that's not something that's going to happen overnight.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge, I'm sure, for all of the areas, and thinking, I suppose, about, you've all mentioned about turnover of staff and implementing workforce plans. And I suppose something that we've kind of talked about previously is about social workers moving between local authorities. And if we take a sort of regional approach to that, a social worker who moves from Wolverhampton to Walsall, for example, the region doesn't lose that skill set. It doesn't lose that because it's a regional approach. Thanks, Beth. So I'll come to Luke next on measuring the impact.
I think a lot of kind of the similar stuff that Beth had identified, really. Obviously, there's a lot of the impact will come out of the data in terms of length of proceedings, less cases going to court, more children remaining with parents following PLO, so de-escalating from PLO rather than escalating. So various kind of data points that we'll be kind of keeping an eye on to look at the impact. And then alongside that, there's the issues around social workers feeling more confident to go into court, social workers feeling more able to challenge other parties where they seek to repeat an assessment, etc. One of the things that's kind of come out of the discussions I've had is around actually how often, if a social worker feels like a repeat assessment isn't necessary, how often do they actually formally challenge that within the proceedings? So having the confidence to kind of stand by their work and say, actually, it's not necessary, and this is why, and I'm really clear about the work that I've done. The other thing for me is about that collaborative relationship, particularly between the social worker and the children's guardian. More consistent communication through the proceedings, more consistent kind of setting out the thinking on both sides, and not being afraid to say, well, this is what I think today for these reasons, and it might change next week because new information might arise, but actually let's just keep having that open dialogue along the way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks, Luke. And Jenny.
Yeah, obviously a lot of the same what Beth and Luke have said. So it's going to be kind of quantitative data stuff, looking at say the number of pre-proceedings concluding in timescales, the number of FGCs, like the percentage of our families open who've had them. So those kind of data things you can measure, but also the qualitative side of it. So reviewing of the social work evidence. I did that at the start, reviewing at the end and comparing the quality, like randomly attending legal gateway meetings so I can see the quality of the information social workers are sharing and the confidence of managers chairing those meetings. Also looking at our tracking and is that consistent? Because I think Luke's mentioned it earlier on, but we had the same issues in Surrey, that there wasn't quality in our tracking and inconsistency across the board. So that's another element that we will be able to measure and see that improvement. And with improved tracking comes kind of improved social worker grip on our children in pre-proceedings and in court.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, so that brings me on to our final question. I'm going to ask for just one example. I'm mindful we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you kind of a little bit about what your next steps are, and kind of one thing that you're really looking forward to delivering between now and March 2025. As you know, with respect to your training plans, what are you kind of most looking forward to delivering between now and the end of the program? Jenny, I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. So I've spoken about the bite-sized stuff, but next year what I'm looking forward to is the face-to-face training that I'm delivering. So for our ASYEs, they are having like a full 3-day, which I know kind of goes against what we've also spoken about. But that's gonna, I'm doing that with a barrister. It's going to be really interactive. So it's going to be really lovely doing something different, interactive, and a full day.
Yeah, sounds excellent. Thank you. Luke.
I guess for me, the most significant aspects are the ones that kind of set us up in the longer term to kind of continue to make effective decisions, to continue to understand what's going on in our region, and to continue to be able to kind of address the drivers of delay, even if they're changing across time. So for me, that's the kind of comprehensive, consistent data able to be provided by local authorities to feed into that local family justice board and to make well-informed decisions. And it's around the kind of communication structure that sets up conversations between service managers across 4 different local authorities to really pick out what do we think is happening in the court arena this quarter, what are the themes that we're seeing, what are the experience of our social workers, and how can we kind of use that to kind of inform our work moving forward.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Luke. So with just a few minutes to go, I'm gonna start to bring us to a close. So it's been really interesting to kind of hear your approaches to this, and kind of just for our audience, we're sort of at the midpoint in theory. We started on the 1st of April, but not everybody on the screen, you'll be surprised, started on the 1st of April. Kind of people joined us kind of throughout the first few months of this program. So we are sort of at early stages in implementing these plans. So to hear your progress so far is really great, and to hear about how you've approached this challenge. And although there's 3 trailblazers represented in this webinar, it is an issue that I know is a focus for each of the 5 areas that are part of the program, and I'm sure across the country, training is something that staff are looking at. You know, I often have always kind of thought about training as sort of day-long, quite content-heavy sessions. So it's been really useful and interesting to hear about your examples of more kind of innovative and more considered approaches. So your bite-sized trainings and your shorter pieces as well. I think that's really useful insight. And just finally, I just point you again at our website. There's a few of the things that you talked about which sounded quite really examples of really good practice, and I know there's good practice that's happening across the country, and we've produced a series of good practice guides, so you can find those on our website as well. And I'm really excited to feature some of the trainings that you're doing, I'm sure, at some point in future editions of our good practice guide. And then finally, just a thanks to the 3 of you for joining, to Luke, Beth, and Jenny for their time and for sharing their insights so far. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of success stories that come out of the work that you're doing around training. And thanks all to those joining who have joined the webinar. If you've got any kind of follow-up questions that you'd like to ask, please do send me an email. Contrary to what it says on screen, my name's not Andrew Laird, it's Yannick Mitchell, and you can find my email address on our website. So please do get in touch with any follow-ups. But thanks for joining us this morning, and keep an eye out because there'll be lots of kind of other learning content and webinars in the future as well. Thanks, everybody.